Welcome to Resolutions, Food, Business, Life and Law. We're going to have a bit of a different look at COVID today. But first, the normal disclaimer. The following is for information and educational purposes. It does not constitute legal or, in this case, medical advice. It does not take into account your individual circumstances. If there's anything in this program that you would like further information on, please contact your lawyer or the resolution team, or in this case, your GP or medical provider. I have with me today Dr Naomi Rutten, a GP in South Australia specialising in mental health. Welcome, Dr Rutten. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, David.
And just for the record, I should say, how are you, sis? It's good to see you again.
It's good. I miss seeing you.
I've been working with Naomi on a new service that she's setting up in her area. Naomi, it's a medical centre that focuses on mental health, and you specialise in young people. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that I do involves young people. So the age bracket that I sort of see and treat is anywhere from 4 years old to, I think my eldest patient at the moment is 82 years of age. But I do see a lot of youth and adolescents, and then that often carries over into adults and even the parents at times.
And one of your areas of speciality, Naomi, is that you work with people that have suffered trauma. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yep. So a lot of the work that I do is around working with people who have experienced developmental trauma. That then carries over into adulthood and can turn into complex trauma. So developmental trauma is where people have been exposed for a significant period of their developmental age, from 0 up until 25, to periods of high stress or threat to their life. So it can involve neglect or physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse as well as neglect of all those things.
And is that a field where there are many resources available, particularly for the young people?
No, there's very, very little, especially where I am in Gawler in South Australia. There is very little to no access to any preventative care in regards to that, and in regards to ongoing therapy for it. It's expensive, and most of the therapies that are required to treat trauma aren't covered by government subsidies.
COVID's very much been a dominating influence on our lives in the last 2 years. It's been something that I've posted up here around from a business perspective. But one of the things that we do see in the media, that you and I have discussed, Naomi, and I've probably seen some first-hand evidence myself, is the impact that COVID has had on people's mental health through things such as anxiety. Are you seeing increases in issues relating to that?
Yeah, so in the work that I've been doing, but also in general practice as a whole, mental health as a result of COVID has absolutely escalated. So before COVID, general practice appointments, I think it was 30% of GP appointments had something to do with psychological well-being, whereas now it's 70%. So
that's a huge increase.
That is huge. And the studies have shown that the government services are continuing to see the exact same number as they were beforehand, but it's general practitioners that are holding that increased number of mental health, with limited resources and very limited supports. So COVID's been hard because so much of it, again, if you look at the effect of what trauma is, if you look at the definition of trauma, it's any position where a person is helpless or powerless. And so the virus itself, the spread, the impact it's had on businesses, on livelihoods, on so many things, has caused most people to be affected in some regard to feeling helpless and powerless.
And certainly with the lockdowns, I know that you've had lockdowns in Australia. We had some pretty tight lockdowns in New Zealand. At one stage, we were the toughest in the world in New Zealand when our restrictions were first put on. You were totally powerless about what to do then.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, the reality is it was something that was necessary, and I totally understand and appreciate that. But you can understand that, we're now, 2.5 years, and a definite 2-year period of ongoing sense of powerlessness and helplessness is going to lead people to want to find ways to find control, to feel more empowered. And we haven't had the opportunity to do those things, to connect with our loved ones and things like that. So the impact increases the stress response in a person, and that ongoing stress response, which is meant to be there to keep us alive from a threat, can't necessarily tell the difference between what's a safe threat and what's a dangerous threat. And when it's been high and ongoing for a really long time, it causes all sorts of physiological changes as well as psychological changes. And that impacts long term, not only on physical health and well-being, but on mental health.
Interested to understand the impact that you're seeing on teenagers and young people, school-age children, and the impact that homeschooling has had. What can you tell us about your experience with that?
Yeah, so my experience from both patients and my own kids from the homeschooling issues, and I must admit, in South Australia, we were pretty lucky. I was also really fortunate because I was an essential worker, so I got to keep going to work because I'm not one who could necessarily homeschool my children. So most of that fell on my husband, and they all managed to survive. But again, we're talking about parents who are not necessarily trained educators, trying to teach their kids at home whilst working full time from home as well. The stress of that is enormous. The stress on the parent, the stress on the children, the unpredictability of it for the children decreases their sense of safety. So safety is something that is an absolute need for our brains and our bodies to be able to grow and develop properly. And we feel safe when there's consistency and predictability. And if there's one thing that the last 2.5 years has taught us, is that things have not been predictable and they have not been consistent. Things can change. We're changing day to day, new rules, new regulations every single day. And again, that leads to a sense of powerlessness. So I definitely know for kids that we're seeing huge numbers of anxiety, a lot of hopelessness in regards to a future, careers. Is there any point in going to school? I know of plenty of youth who seem to thrive being at home and learning from home rather than being in a school environment.
So that was my next question. Are you seeing an increase in the number of students who don't want to go back to school and don't want to engage in that social space?
Yeah, it's there is a huge problem at the moment. And I think it's always been there, but I think that COVID has exacerbated the issue of kids not being at school and avoiding school, but also not wanting to return to that sort of education style, which, so much of their life was spent online. And there's pros and cons to learning online. We also know they need to spend time with their peers, but that was not a priority during the COVID years. So they've learned how to socialize in different ways. So there are definitely major issues, and I have a lot of clients who are struggling to get to school. And it's a big problem for schools trying to get them to school and follow the laws that they have to follow to keep kids at school. It's tough on the parents because the parents are doing everything they possibly can to get their kids to school, but the kids I'm seeing are so highly anxious and so fearful that it's impacting not only their learning capability, their ability to go to school, their families, it's impacting everyone around them as well as themselves. And COVID has definitely contributed to that.
So, with the substantial increase in need as we work through the residual effects of COVID, working through those students' anxieties, getting them back into what you and I remember as the normality of going to school and interacting, you've decided to set up a new centralised service.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
So one of the biggest issues for anybody has significant mental health issues that is limiting their ability to function day to day is then this need to go to 5 different support workers, so whether it be psychologists or therapists or doctors or um, an OT or whoever it might be, that are then in 5 different places. So my dream has always been to have all of those services, or as many as we can possibly fit, under the one roof, so that these clients can only need to be familiar with going to the one building. So the goal has always been to have a facility where all of those services that are necessary for working together to heal people struggling with trauma or any significant mental illness, that the individual, the client, only needs to go to the one building, and they've got all of the different services there. So there's consistency, there's predictability, they know what to expect, and therefore they feel safe. And until somebody feels safe, they're not going to be able to work on healing. So it actually improves the outcomes.
And if you can get more consistent healing, as you described it, and better efficiencies, that means people will be able to get better sooner.
Yes.
If you're doing it more efficiently, you'll be able to see more people. As those people get better, you can then take on new patients. So overall, even utilising the existing resources that are spread around the region at the moment, by bringing them into one centre, you're going to be able to serve more people and serve them better and get people well quicker.
Absolutely, that is the absolute goal. At the moment, my waiting list has about 25 people on it.
With one of the things that has come up, it's really interesting that you were in your submission, in your proposal, that you've actually referred to it as focusing on mental health, and that seems to have triggered an adverse reaction in some areas of the public. Now, I know that the area that you're looking at putting this centre is near a school, but from what you're saying, actually, a lot of your client base is actually going to be school age children. Is that correct?
Yeah, so at least 50% of the clientele that I see would be children and adolescents. There's limited amount we can do working directly with the kids, so we also work with the parents. So to do that, I went and trained in parenting education, and so I run parenting training as well. So one of the things that I very much do is not only working with the children and the adolescents, but working with the parents, teaching them parent education as well.
So it is going to be very, very family centric. So as well as potentially having clients at the school, the parents of the children at the school will be the clients, and potentially the staff as well. Now it's been very interesting to see just how the spread of information goes, and perhaps that's related to COVID as well. When COVID came out, there was so much disinformation around treatments and what it was and where it came from, that looking at some of the posts, for example, I see messages claiming that your centre is going to be a 24-hour drug rehab clinic. It's not going to be that, is it?
No. So the reality is there were a few people who wanted more information, and unfortunately, as a result, they didn't come to me and ask me. They didn't talk to my planner, and they developed their own idea of what they thought it was, and they distributed it as truth. But there is absolutely no truth to it being a drug rehab centre. I don't actually work in drug and alcohol. It's a completely different field of medicine. I don't work in drugs and alcohol, so there won't actually be any of that sort of side of things at this
Okay.
clinic at all.
And were you surprised by the response? To be fair, there has been a lot of positive response as well. I think I had a look at your Facebook recently, and the vast majority of the comments are really supportive of the service and the concept of the centre. And it is only a minority of people that are expressing concerns, but they tend to be very vocal. Were you surprised by that response?
Yeah, I was absolutely floored. I had no idea and no expectation, and neither did my planner, that there would be the amount of vigorous uh, opposition to what we were proposing, so it was really, really quite surprising to see that the beliefs around mental health are
Do you think
still
there's still a stigma
evident.
attached to that?
Yeah, there seems to be absolute stigma. I know that online there was still a lot of comments around, and even in the reports against the proposal, sort of comments of that clients with mental health are dysfunctional, that they might just snap, that they are at risk of attacking people. And the reality is, and the research is, because I researched it carefully, people who experience mental health, number one, some basic facts: 50% of the human population in Western society will suffer from some form of mental health at some point in their life. And at any given point, 1 in 5 people are struggling with a mental health condition. So 20% of the population at any given time are struggling with a mental health condition. And the reality is, throughout COVID, that's increased. And in the area of Gawler where I live, it's probably higher. So, and the reality is, there's been significant research done, and people who experience mental health, and we're talking about mental health conditions such as trauma, but anxiety, OCD, PTSD, um, depression, things like that. In fact, all the research showed that they are more likely to be the victims of it, not the perpetrators. So the belief that who struggle with mental health, no matter what their mental health condition is, especially if they're engaged in therapeutic services, there is absolutely no evidence to show that there is any increased risk of violence or aggression at all. So these essentially are just normal, everyday people that you're going to be sitting next to on a bus or a train, walking past in the supermarket. They're going to be teachers at schools. They're going to be police officers, paramedics, doctors, nurses, people who work at your local convenience store.
And students. I mean, one of the things that seems to be very very untouched in the public communications that I've seen, and the posts that we've been looking at, is that the child and adolescent aspect of mental health is very rarely discussed and touched on.
Yeah.
Would you?
So yeah, and I haven't looked at the recent stats, but my understanding is that some recent surveys showed that in South Australia, at least 70% of children and students, adolescents, are struggling with some diagnosable mental health condition. So 70%.
And that could be, and part of that could be, anxiety related, driven by the
Absolutely.
conditions of COVID that we've been living
Absolutely.
under.
Absolutely. So the conditions of COVID, plus everything else that has been happening, pre-COVID, post-COVID, all of these things, the high rates of diagnosable mental health conditions in children and adolescents is extremely high, and it's increasing. And there's very few resources. We want to increase those resources. And, again, I very much want to work at preventative intervention, which there's very little of at the moment.
That it sounds like you're working really hard to address a need there. I think from what we can see, all mental health services, there's needs across the board, but child and adolescents, particularly over the last couple of years, there's definitely a shortage of services on. Interestingly, I'm looking to speak to someone in New Zealand on this topic as well, and I've had some really positive responses, but it's no surprise in that a few of the responses have been, look, sorry, we're just too busy to actually sit down and have a discussion.
Yeah.
A number of the services over here have actually put in their websites they can't take any more
Oh,
people on because they're too busy dealing with the issues.
Yeah, there's at the moment in the local area here, it's at least a 3-month wait to get into the public system for an urgent child and adolescent psychiatrist appointment. Similar for an urgent adult psychiatry appointment. There are no private psychiatrists in South Australia taking new patients because they are all overloaded themselves.
And that's where it falls on to the allied health, like GPs, to provide that frontline support.
Absolutely. The psychological supports, it's usually about a 6-month wait. And for a private psychologist, it can be anywhere from 6 to 12-month waits. And, like I said, for therapy appointments for me, my wait, I stopped putting people on my waiting list over a year ago because it's just so long.
Well, it sounds like you're working very hard to address a real need that's there. I hope the discussion today has helped people's understanding and certainly awareness of the issue. Where can people go if there is something that's critically urgent? If they need to pick up a phone or a website they can go to, what can they do to try and get help?
Yep. So there's a few fantastic resources out there. The Australian government has a website called Head to Health, and that actually has links to all of the support services that they can access. The most common ones that are recommended are Lifeline, which I'd quote the number, but I'm frightened I'll get it wrong. But if you have a look at it, Lifeline, there's also, in the event of suicidality and suicidal thoughts, suicide callback number is there as well. For domestic violence, we refer people to 1-800-RESPECT. For children and adolescents, they can call Kids Helpline. And there's also some online forums through Beyond Blue, which are brilliant for the teens especially, where they can chat to people. So a lot of them have a phone service, but they're also also often have an online forum where you can chat to someone, because I know that for a lot of my patients, when they're really heightened, they can't actually talk. So whereas they might feel comfortable to type.
Yeah.
Yep. So there are those sorts of services online as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hey, Naomi, thank you very much for speaking with me today. It's an absolute pleasure. Really proud of the work that you're doing, and I wish you every success in going forward with this service, and I look forward to seeing it come to fruition. Thank you, Dr. Naomi Rutten.
Thank you, David.
That's all for today's episode of Resolutions, Food, Business, Life and Law. If you have any further questions or you have any thoughts on ideas for future podcasts, please contact us at contact@resolutionslc.com. We'll see you next time.